This video deals with topics including psychological, sexual, and emotional abuse. The intention is to inform, not sensationalize, and there will be no in-depth discussion of traumatic events. However, given the nature of these subjects, please make sure you are in an okay headspace for dealing with this kind of thing before watching. Thank you.
Marilyn Manson was the perfect story protagonist for a frustrated writer like myself. He was a character who, because of his contempt for the world around him, and more so himself, does everything he can to trick people into liking him. And then, once he wins their confidence, he uses it to destroy them.
Now with an ABC News exclusive. Game of Thrones actress Esme Bianco says she was physically, emotionally, and sexually abused by rock star Marilyn Manson.
Sometimes, increasingly, basically every day now, a famous person is accused of doing a very bad thing. And every time, public response ranges from flat-out denial to utter devastation, often at levels of intensity that would befit a personal betrayal. Which is odd, because public knowledge of a famous person is limited to certain windows: their creative output, interviews, Twitter feed, and so on. Even when someone speaks to a camera, unscripted or unedited, you're still not seeing anything outside of that. You are seeing a version of themselves that they are content for you to see, which is nothing like knowing someone in real life. I've always found it illogical for people to hold very strong opinions on the character of people they don't know at all, on situations they were not there to witness, and to spend a great deal of energy coming to one conclusion or another, when the only thing they can really know for sure is that they don't. What we do know, however, is that situations in this vein seem to be cropping up frustratingly often these days. Can't Google anyone. For God's sake, I was just getting back into Rammstein. But it's inevitable. The culture has shifted so that victims of this kind of thing stand more of a chance of being heard or cared about, so of course all sorts of stuff is coming out of the woodwork. In the 80s, rock stars just slept with children and that was just how it was, and now people are like, maybe that's bad. I'm Shanalika, and today we are discussing Marilyn Manson. For various reasons that I've talked about more in another video, as a teenager I connected more to his music and other work than any other artist, inspiring thoughts and ideas that fundamentally shaped the person I am today, making this by far the strongest parasocial relationship I've ever experienced. And while that didn't manifest strongly by most people's standards, I never had so much as a pencil case and certainly didn't engage in blatant idol worship the way my friends did. This was still someone who'd been important to me, who I'd once held in high regard, and the end of that was still a loss. My aim isn't to argue about what Manson did or didn't do. Again, regardless of what the courts decide, we are never going to know for sure. Instead, I'm discussing him as an example of a broader systemic issue that most people do not recognize and are not equipped to deal with. The ways my friends treated musicians in school, and the ways people still commonly relate to celebrities, isn't good or healthy. My aim is to try and challenge that in the hope that it will help to keep more people safe. On April the 23rd, 2019, Evan Rachel Wood testified in court against an unnamed abuser in order to support the Phoenix Act, a bill that would increase the statute of limitations, giving victims of domestic violence more time to be able to bring their cases to court. It's pretty grim, and I will not be repeating any of it. Suffice to say, it includes forced intoxication, sleep deprivation, physical abuse, and rape. In February 2021, she specified that her abuser was Brian Warner, aka Marilyn Manson. Following this, 4 more women came forward recounting experiences of similar types of abuse. One of Manson's exes, Rose McGowan, made a statement in support. Manson denied all of it. He was subsequently dropped from his record label Loma Vista, edited out of the TV show American Gods, and dropped from the TV series Creepshow. Shortly after this, singer Phoebe Bridgers tweeted in support and shared a negative experience visiting his house as a teenager, followed by further support and another negative experience from Elise Rosso of Wolf Alice. Next, actress Esme Bianco came forward with quite a detailed abuse experience in the New York magazine. In April, she filed a sexual abuse lawsuit. In May, another of Manson's exes, Ashley Morgan Smithline, stated that she had suffered similar abuse. The same month, Ashley Walters, his former personal assistant, filed a sexual assault complaint against him with the Superior Court of Los Angeles County. Also the same month, another unnamed ex filed a lawsuit against him for much the same thing. In June, Smithline filed a lawsuit. In January 2022, Evan Rachel Wood came out with a documentary on her experience and claimed that the sex scene in the video for Heart-Shaped Glasses was both real and coerced under intoxication. Manson's attorney dismissed this, and Manson filed a lawsuit against Wood for defamation the following month, claiming that she and documentary maker Ashley Gore secretly recruited, coordinated, and pressured prospective accusers to emerge simultaneously with allegations of rape and abuse. Several lawsuits against Manson have since been dismissed on the basis of not falling within the time frame of the statute of limitations. In January 2023, Smithline's lawsuit was dismissed on the basis of her not getting a new lawyer after splitting with the old one. Out of court, Manson reached a settlement with Bianco and she agreed to drop the case. This was immediately followed by a brand new lawsuit from an unnamed individual who claimed she was assaulted by Manson in the 90s when she was 16 years old. In February, Smithline U-turned on her allegations, stated she in fact hadn't been assaulted but had been pressurized into believing she had by Evan Rachel Wood and others, supporting Manson's claim that the allegations are a coordinated smear attack by Wood and Gore. In response to this, a spokesperson for Wood stated that they believe Smithline was threatened into changing her position. So that's what we know. That's not all of the accusations as far as I can gather, just the main ones. I've included this just to show as up-to-date a picture possible of the current circumstances, although those will probably have changed by the time this video comes out. But I actually wrote the first version of this video with the same overall aims and conclusions several years ago.
Hollywood has been rocked by this huge scandal of the allegations against Harvey Weinstein, and of course one of the most prominent alleged victims is one of your ex-partners, Rose McGowan.
In this interview, Manson demonstrates a completely unprompted and frankly suspicious level of concern towards the accused's livelihoods over those of the abused.
I just don't want to see this turn Hollywood into something that takes away from films being made, and that's not to disrespect the people that are saying these allegations. I just think that if you have something to say, you should say it to the police, not to the press. In
suggesting victims go to the police, he is either ignorant of or deliberately overlooking the police's god-awful track record on sexual assault. And, not to be catty, but it's quite telling for this once anti-everything rebellious Hellraiser to now take the position that victims of sexual assault should be good law-abiding citizens and report their problems to the police. There is of course an argument that abusers with platforms should be called out publicly, otherwise they can continue to reach and hurt many more people, which I'm inclined to agree with, especially because not all forms of abuse are crimes or punishable by law. As a matter of fact, staying just within the limits of what is legal provides an excellent way for abuse to occur unhindered.
What's your message? What are you trying to get across in the lyrics to these songs?
It's always about being yourself and not being ashamed of being different or thinking different.
Marilyn Manson tended to come across very well on camera, much to the surprise of parents and the glee of their teenage children.
Anything can be misinterpreted. People can look at Christ on a cross and think, this is an image of murder, this is violent, this has sexual imagery in it. And I think it's my job as an artist to be out there pushing people's buttons and making them question everything.
This was particularly apparent in the absence of many others in the genre doing the same. In contrast to the swaggering hypermasculinity of many other rock stars, Manson was self-possessed, articulate, funny, and incisive when it came to social commentary. We all remember the way he handled Columbine especially.
If Marilyn Manson can walk into our town and promote hate, violence, suicide, death, drug use, and Columbine-like behavior, I can say, not without a fight you can't.
The two byproducts of that whole tragedy were violence and entertainment and gun control. And how perfect that was the two things that we were going to talk about with the upcoming election. The president was shooting bombs overseas, yet I'm a bad guy. because I've sang some rock and roll songs. And who's a bigger influence, the president or Marilyn Manson?
Do you know?
I'd like to think me, but I'm gonna go with the president.
Importantly, he could also come across as sensitive and vulnerable, in particular in videos from the 90s where he is younger, more awkward, and not yet carrying himself with the confidence he would develop later. Oh, baby Bat has emotions, don't you just want to wrap him up in a big goth blanket? This was compounded by his androgynous aesthetic, which in this case, falsely, signalled kinship and safety to those of marginalised genders and sexualities. His disregard for gender convention invited women and queer people to identify with him directly.
But Santa doesn't have breasts, you know, and I think it would confuse...
Why not? He's kind of fat. You know, think about it. Like, what about men? If men's breasts get to a certain size, should that be considered sexual? Like if a big fat guy has big breasts? Because what about the guy that got breast implants? I bet he can't walk around topless.
You're a provocative person.
Maybe you have to have male
think,
genitalia to be Santa. The breasts are irrelevant, but maybe you have to have a penis to be Santa.
His poise, intelligence, and willingness to show vulnerability offered massive appeal to those who otherwise were left wanting for this kind of relatability in the broader metal scene. He represented the downtrodden weirdos and rattled those who sought to repress us. How could we not stand?
If he's a Jewish Santa, he has to be circumcised.
Marilyn Manson's work and persona sat solidly in the realm of cultural critique and parody, deliberately revolting against conventional sensibilities and shaking up cultural norms. In interviews, he would often make absurd claims and statements, seemingly intended to provoke his hosts and audience into a reaction, be that horror or laughter.
I travel with a cat. I have a small white cat. It actually breastfed when she was a kitten.
When the cat was a kitten, it breastfed on your nipple?
Yeah.
Much of what he said was obviously not intended to be taken seriously. If you weren't in on the joke, you were the joke. Or so it seemed. Completely unprompted, halfway through his autobiography, The Long Hard Road Out of Hell, Manson states his views on homosexuality. I'm just gonna read it. My philosophy about sexuality is that I don't have a problem with anything anyone does in any way. All I ask is that you know the rules. I've sucked the dicks of several men, which a lot of straight guys won't admit to having done or wanting to do. But just like kissing a girl can't get her pregnant, sucking a guy's dick doesn't make you gay. It's not that I'm against being gay, I just want to clarify what makes you gay. Please note that this list only pertains to guys. All women are by nature lesbian. So let's get things straight, no pun intended. If you meet any of the qualifications below, you are gay. What follows is a list of 38 rules, including if you discuss art for more than 45 minutes, and if you're friends with anyone named Dick. 9 of the rules involve Morrissey. He then goes on to clarify that he has broken several of the rules, including at least one involving Morrissey. In case it's not obvious, I can't help liking this. This is a really good bit. It's so stupid. However, I have learned these past few years that unless there is substantial evidence that someone doesn't hold harmful views, which means they actually need to go quite hard the other way, then you don't know what is meant by a joke like this. It's blatantly self-aware and tongue-in-cheek, but the very nature of the joke's existence reflects on internalized homophobia-drenched anxieties, reinforced when Manson then goes on to discuss performing homosexual acts and stresses how not gay they are later in the book. Expressing both queerness and queerphobia at once, authorial intent is obfuscated, the meaning left to the reader's interpretation. And in my opinion, this is key to Marilyn Manson's popularity and success. After all, as a marketing tactic, you really can't do better than capturing both sides of the political spectrum. You could look at this and see critique or endorsement depending on what you want to see. Your views are correct and you like Marilyn Manson. Therefore, he must be agreeing with you. Drastically different politics and meanings can be projected onto the exact same image and music. Messaging that seems to affirm existing beliefs can be the object of focus, while those which contradict can be written off as parody and exaggeration. I remember doing this myself. As a teenager, I read the hypersexualization and objectification of women in Manson's videos as a parody of popular culture, but there was nothing to give this interpretation any weight. That was just what I wanted it to be, how I justified continuing to like this artist despite that. And it's entirely possible, even likely, that Manson himself was operating under similar logic, albeit with more self-awareness.
The first time we performed together, I sang while holding her on a leash the whole time. to make a point about our patriarchal society. Of course, not because it turned me on to drag a scantily clad woman around the stage by a leather leash.
In 2009, Manson gave an interview with Spin magazine describing Christmas following his breakup with Evan Rachel Wood.
I made the mistake of trying to desperately grasp on and save that and own it. Every time I called her that day, I called 158 times. I took a razor blade and I cut myself on my face or on my hands. I wanted to show her the pain that she put me through. It was like, I want you to physically see what you've done. The song, I Want to Kill You Like They Do in the Movies, is about my fantasies. I have fantasies every day about smashing her skull in with a sledgehammer. That's not getting any easier to read, like, fuck.
Even at the time, this felt like a bit of a kick in the gut, but sort of embarrassing as well. This was an objectively pathetic way for a grown-ass adult man to behave, but I didn't want him to be an idiot, so I mostly just dismissed it as absurd exaggeration. I know now, of course, absurd exaggeration still doesn't necessarily equate to harmless. Looking back, the whole statement looks very much like someone threatening self-harm in order to manipulate someone into doing what they want, with the background of mental illness serving as a convenient shield against scrutiny. Even back then, when depression had more of a stigma, we could still be remarkably forgiving of men who were sad in eyeliner. Not sure how much thought we spared for the mental health of those they hurt. In the same interview, Manson reflects that the whole phoning and self-harm thing was a stupid thing to do, a line that is often cut by publications trying to paint a particular picture of him. But, thing is, if he did do that, stupid is not really the adjective. The one we're looking for is abusive. This whole thing brings to mind the song Kim by Eminem. At the time, I remember finding this to be a powerfully affecting work of art that explored the extremities of obsession and betrayal in a way that obviously wasn't meant to be in any way interpreted as literal, as evidenced by the fact that Eminem did not kill Kim. Kim is still alive. I think. I mean, she could be dead for some other reason by now. I haven't checked. Anyway, the point is that art can be a good, healthy, and valuable way to explore violent desires, dark thoughts, and troubling concepts, provided you don't cause real harm in the process. But naming a specific person, a real person who fans could find and bully and harass, or worse, who would have to deal with the fear of that on top of the just psychological fuckery of knowing that song was about her. Was that really necessary? Wouldn't a fictional character have done the job just as well? Maybe it made it easier for Eminem to get in character, but that came at the expense of almost certain psychological harm for at least one person. Not to mention inviting the threat of physical harm as well. Kim wasn't someone with comparable power to Eminem, like at all. She couldn't hit back in any meaningful way against someone with that level of platform and worldwide adulation. Comparatively, she had no voice. She would have had to just sit there and watch the accolades pour in for his narrative where she is murdered. The only story about her that anyone really knows. And that's deeply fucked up. It's similar with Manson's sledgehammer comment. He could have just written the song and left it at that. The accompanying comments were wildly irresponsible. Yet when people brought this up last year, a representative said it was obviously a theatrical rock star interview promoting a new record and not a factual account. Like that was ever the problem. We know that Marilyn Manson didn't smash Evan Rachel Wood's skull in with a sledgehammer because again, she would be dead. Which could well be why he didn't do it and just said it instead. Little bit harder to get away with actually killing someone, even if you're a famous man, although, you know, it happens. The representative goes on to say, the fact that Evan and Manson got engaged 6 months after this interview would indicate that no one took the story literally. And yeah, again, the literally point being somewhat moot. I don't know, dude, does getting engaged mean everything's chill? Do people exclusively get engaged to those they have zero serious issues with? Is marriage the epitome of a healthy relationship? Or might there be other reasons someone stays in a relationship they shouldn't? Those who fall into this Marilyn Manson type category tend to exhibit 3 qualities that afford them power over other people. They're also, of course, usually cis, white, male, etc., but the forms of power I want to discuss now are those that relate specifically to being a public figure. The first, and possibly least acknowledged, is charm and charisma, which I've touched on a bit in an earlier video, but I'm going to go into more detail here.
What do you mean? What do you think I mean?
I don't know, but you look at me with those red eyes, I feel like I'm suddenly under your
You've
spell.
done something wrong.
Charm and charisma, as I'm defining them here, are qualities that incline people to like someone quickly and without substantial cause. This could manifest as physical attractiveness, a good sense of humour, conventionally recognised forms of intelligence, and behaviours such as attentiveness, physical affection, gifts, and flattery. People involved with charismatic abusers frequently report being made to feel like the most special individual on the planet while in that person's presence. Because charm and charisma incline others to require less proof of trustworthiness than they might with the individual simply less likeable to begin with, they make people more vulnerable to manipulation and abuse. It's also worth pointing out that charismatic individuals will generally weaponize it as a natural automatic response to positive feedback and reinforcement. It does not at all need to be deliberate or malicious to be a problem. Abusers typically don't think what they're doing is abuse.
When someone starts complaining about something that happened that seems a little bit not as serious as really sexual assault, because I think that's insulting to people that have been sexually assaulted.
Obviously, I'm not saying all charming and charismatic people are abusers. What I am saying is if you find yourself inclined to trust in the absence of hard evidence that trust is deserved, you should in fact do the exact opposite until said evidence presents itself. I'll come back to what this evidence could look like in a bit. Next, there are a couple of factors more well known to contributing to unequal power dynamics. Financial capital, or money, and social capital, or clout. Financial capital, of course, I think we're all familiar with how easily wealthy people can move through the world, dazzling with shows of wealth and apparent generosity, throwing money at problems to make them go away, disinclining people from complaining by threatening their source of income. And finally, there is social standing, or clout, which I don't need to explain how that gives someone power, really, do I? You know how fan culture works. You know the order of things when people are put on a pedestal. The attention goes to their head, they do shitty things, fans turn themselves into pretzels trying to defend them. The way that rock stars have taken advantage of young, impressionable, and often financially, emotionally, or physically vulnerable fans is not just well known, but part of popular culture. I should add that you don't actually need to have a lot of clout in order for this kind of hierarchy to start showing up. 10,000 followers on Twitter can be enough. The intensity of the dynamic doesn't necessarily change as numbers go up. What changes is the volume of people you might have that dynamic with. Public figures who are cool, musicians, actors, YouTubers, TikTokers, creatives of any description, frequently possess all three forms of power. And this creates a hierarchy so invisible yet so immense that unless those factors are specifically noticed and checked, abuse is almost inevitable. I didn't actually read this when I was a teenager. My sister did, and she told me that it was a self-indulgent dirge of Manson just taking advantage of vulnerable people and having big dark thoughts about it like some sort of teenage edgelord. She didn't use that term because it wasn't around at the time, but you know what I mean. So I opted not to read this book, figuring that it must have been written when he was young and stupid. But looking at it now, he was in fact almost 30. I've not read it cover to cover because I don't want to subject myself to that. But just what I have read is so brimming with evidence not in Manson's favour that I'm having to actively restrain myself from writing about it. But I'm not going to because I'm not here to traumatise people. If you want to, you can borrow this book from someone and verify what I'm saying for yourself. No one who reads this and has half a brain could possibly be surprised about what's happening now, because it's here in writing quite explicitly. The only way you can get around this is to dismiss this account as entirely fictional, and while that is possible, it's not the impression I get reading it. The situations described, such as him and other band members taking advantage of their status and copious amounts of drugs and alcohol to have sex with fans, aren't just plausible, they're likely. They line up very closely with accounts of other rock stars in similar positions of power. And it is, to be very clear, the power imbalance that is at the root of the problem here rather than the specifics of any of the activities themselves. That said, these did involve violence and shock or kink-coded aspects like covering people in raw meat, confessional therapy sessions, restraining people with those kink things that stab you in the neck if you don't stay in a certain position, pissing on them, you get the picture. Which are intense situations to get into when meeting someone for the first time, especially if that someone is a person you idolize. Assuming that any of these anecdotes are true or based on truth, I think it's safe to assume that the band were not taking care to ensure that their fans felt safe at all, let alone safe enough to tap out as situations escalated and they were asked to participate in more and more dangerous and humiliating acts. Consent is just one aspect of a much broader psychological picture. Also relevant are the circumstances that could drive someone into a position like this, or how they might feel after the fact, and that kind of thing can fuck someone up enough to land them in therapy for years. But that's not what we hear about. We don't get the groupie story. We get this. Manson was confident enough to openly talk about exploiting people in his book without damaging his career, probably knowing it would be entirely overshadowed by his whole "I'm evil and don't give a shit" shtick. More critically, he understood that nobody else really gave a shit either. What he was describing, after all, wasn't a million miles away from the activities of bands like Led Zeppelin, and we had already decided that that was fine. Or at least that there was nothing to be done about it. Rock stars represented a dialed-up version of normal day-to-day life. According to stats from Rape Crisis England and Wales as of this year, 1 in every 4 women have been raped or sexually assaulted in adulthood, compared to 1 in 18 men. 1 out of 2 rapes against women are carried out by a current or previous sexual partner. 98% of rapists are men, and in 5 out of 6 cases, the perpetrator is someone the victim knows. This doesn't just mean you probably know someone who's been raped. It means you probably know some rapists. Abuse is not weird or wild or unusual or unlikely. It is inherent to the structures of oppression our society has been built and continues to stand upon. Let's dive into the default dynamics of an average cool famous person and a non-famous romantic interest. The famous person experiences a high volume of sexual interest, often from very young fans. Because they approach of their own enthusiastic volition, it feels less creepy to accept and get sexually involved. Younger people are easier to control and manipulate because they haven't yet had the experience to teach them what is and isn't an acceptable way of being treated. Add to that the projected halo that comes from fan culture, and you have someone who won't raise a finger to mistreatment for a good long while. Through this, the standards of behaviour the famous person need expect of themselves are further lowered and warped. If and when one romantic interest does start raising issues, the glut of interest makes it easy to drop them and find another, safe in the knowledge that if they come out with the story, on top of having to publicly relive their trauma, they risk online and even in-person abuse by thousands to millions of people. If the abuse is illegal and they take it to court, assuming they have the money or the constitution, it is in the knowledge that the vast majority of rape and abuse cases fail. I am not saying that every relationship between a famous person and a non-famous person ends in mistreatment or abuse. You can, in theory, to an extent, have power and privilege and healthy relationships with more marginalised people. But this requires an understanding of how these power structures work, a hell of a lot of self-awareness and reflection, and a willingness to take action to counteract those effects. For example, I come from a middle-class family, and although right now I'm not making minimum wage, the rest of my family are accountants, lawyers, and doctors. I am probably not spoken about. My upbringing still affects the way I think. Relatively recently, there was not really an argument, but a situation with my partner, who is of a working class background. There was an event we both really wanted to go to. I suggested buying tickets, he said let's wait, they probably won't sell out. I got distracted by something, forgot about it, fast forward a few months, tickets sell out, and I'm very sad. Now giving it more thought, I asked my partner if he'd wanted to wait because he hadn't been able to afford a ticket, and that was indeed the case. Beforehand, this had just not occurred to me as an explanation, because I have never been without money to the point that I genuinely can't spare 16 quid. So I said, look, next time I will buy the tickets and either you can pay me back later or I just get them for you. Because on one hand, spending the money so both of us can go to an event will bring me a great deal more joy than keeping the money and neither of us getting to go. But also the fact that I have more financial security than you means I can and should get more of the things when we're doing stuff together. And he told me that he agreed in principle but found it hard to accept and even harder to ask. So I committed to trying to be mindful of the class difference and to actively offer more often. I also asked them to still try and communicate more clearly on this kind of thing because although I'm more alert to it now, inferring unspoken information is not something I excel at in general. Autism. I don't hold many privileges over this person or a great many above or below most of my peers. I made a joke about joining the alt-right recently and my friend snidely asked who exactly I thought I'd be leaving behind when I pulled up the ladder. And then they went on to point out that I was too many things and they definitely wouldn't let me in. Tragic. Even so, conversations like the one I just described are necessary to understand and address the ways our privileges and marginalizations do intersect. It's a conversation I've been on both sides of. And I can say with absolute certainty that it is so much harder to ask something of someone than it is to offer. So, bringing it back to Marilyn Manson and Evan Rachel Wood. A 36-year-old globally known male rock star and an 18-year-old fresh-faced female model. You could argue that it is possible, in theory, for that relationship not to be toxic and damaging despite the power differential. It is possible. So, do you think Marilyn Manson was doing the work? Do you think he conscientiously chose to get with a teenager while being mindful of the age gap? Do you think he was aware of the power imbalance and committed to addressing it? Do you think that was an ongoing discussion in their relationship? Do you think he would regularly invite her to raise any concerns she might have in order to actively counteract the pressure his status would put upon her not to? Do you think he would take criticism on board and act upon it? Do you think he had any intention of pulling her up if his own footing might slip even the barest fraction as a result? Because that is the level of attention and care and self-awareness and effort that would be required in that situation for mistreatment not to happen. Otherwise it's just a fucking given. But let's just say he didn't do all the really bad stuff. Let's say Evan Rachel Wood is recruiting a slew of other people who are all as malicious and willing to face public ire as she is, because she's into unnecessary legal battles and being despised by millions of people, I guess. It's possible. If that's the case, then that's wild and obviously terrible. Sucks to be him. But maybe he shouldn't have dated a fucking 18-year-old when he was 36. Maybe he shouldn't have told the press he wanted to smash her skull in with a sledgehammer. Maybe he should have considered how consent might not be as straightforward as yes or no with a power differential that vast. Except if he had, let's be real, we wouldn't be having this conversation. And I think this is what people don't understand. People want to believe that powerful guys are just regular guys, innocent until proven guilty. But the truth is, even regular guys operate on a level of structural power that makes oppressive and abusive behavior towards non-men unconscious and automatic. And the more levels of power you've got going for you, the worse this problem gets. So the frustrating reality is that the actions necessary to counteract this tend to occur among the marginalized, those forced to recognize oppression through experience, instead of those who hold the most power, influence the most people, and could enact the most change. Manson seems to imply that he experienced sexual abuse as a child in the Channel 4 interview, and clearly describes physical childhood abuse in his autobiography. Again, we don't know if this is true either, but it certainly could be. It's often said, and I think there's a fair bit of evidence for, abused people being more likely to repeat those behaviours. But privileges like being white, cis, and male offer positions of power where enacting further abuse is not only possible, but permitted. In the same way as an institution that does not actively challenge racism will be racist by default, powerful men who do not actively challenge the inclination to abuse power will abuse by default. The problem is systemic. It is more likely to happen than not. I'm not saying just believe victims. I actually think that's a dangerously oversimplified slogan. False accusations do happen for myriads of reasons and shouldn't be discarded entirely as a possibility. But I do think we should rethink innocent until proven guilty in a world where innocence is not really a thing. No one's innocent. We oppress and are oppressed at different times, in different measures, sometimes at a position of more power and sometimes less. Our choice is whether to climb as high up the ladder as possible or to try and burn the fucking thing to the ground. While the specific power dynamics addressed in this video aren't as universal as characteristics like race or gender, the increasing blurring of boundaries online is making it more and more pertinent to more people. In the past, you had to put in quite a lot of work to get noticed by an idol, trailing them from one gig to another halfway across the country. Now you can just slide into someone's DMs. There are many more opportunities for those with significant platforms to form relationships with those without. The entire thing can happen without even being witnessed by anybody else. In case anything remotely like this exists in your life, you need an honest, unflinching, and ongoing dialogue about that power differential in order for that relationship to be healthy. If you can't bring it up without risking the relationship, it's not a relationship you should be in. But more broadly speaking, this remains relevant even when dealing with people you don't know. The desire for a clear-cut narrative, where someone is either a terrible villain or absolved beyond doubt, is understandable but fundamentally disregards the very circumstances that allow this type of abuse to occur. It's like when Leaving Neverland came out and those men were smiling and laughing while recalling the time they spent with Michael Jackson, and people were going, oh, the accusations must be fake because they're smiling, clearly they loved him. Of course they loved him! Of course they loved him. We have got to get more comfortable with the complexity inherent to real people instead of reducing them to simplified abstractions. Not evil hiding behind a virtuous facade that can one day be ripped away entirely. Good and bad at once, equally true, existing together in a confusing, complicated mess. We need to start dealing with that reality, not some clean fiction we'd prefer. And not bulldozing over the chaos does mean giving up on a clear path out of it. We need to get more comfortable sitting in a place of not always knowing, of being aware of likelihoods but making peace with uncertainty. And, frankly, not getting quite so personally invested in people you literally don't know. Easier said than done, maybe, if it's someone whose impact on you was so massive that it fundamentally shaped who you are today. My relationship with Marilyn Manson may not have been particularly strong by most people's standards, but I still wouldn't be the person I am today if not for him.
Well, I saw these bathroom symbols when I was in the hallway, which didn't make sense to me.
Why not?
Well, because I might wear a dress, but so would I go, what bathroom do I go in?
You can imagine what I got from this and thought the interviewers too dumb to understand.
So, like, there's this and my record is more about this.
Okay.
Oh, no women.
He's saying end gender. He's saying end gender. He's so much more evolved than you two primitive fuckeggs could ever begin to comprehend. Except maybe they were right. Maybe he did mean end women. Maybe he didn't mean anything and he was just being an asshole. I don't know.
It's just about against bathrooms for women.
So women should go on the street?
No. Yes.
Yes.
And now I know that I don't know. Maybe it was me that was more evolved. Marilyn Manson's direct input to my brain ended with the content of his work and recorded public appearances. The rest, the interpretations I drew, the conclusions I came to, the understandings of binary systems and oppressive structures, the drive to reject and rebel against them when damaging and unnecessary, that all happened in here. That wasn't Marilyn Manson. That was me looking at Marilyn Manson, and that is a very important difference. It's been significant learning not to credit my thought processes to their stimuli, and on the flip side of that, to not consider any idea original enough to come from any one person or thing, be that myself or someone else. Because everything is a result of everything else. We're shaped by every aspect of our environment in myriads of subtle ways that we will never even be able to recognize. The inflation of certain people or things in our minds is easier to comprehend, but that doesn't make it more real. All that aside, most of the best people I know have been heavily influenced by some of the worst. Marilyn Manson played an incredibly important role in a great many of our lives. I know I'm far from alone in this. That's never gonna change. And it doesn't need to. What we gained from his work, or from anyone's work, the strength, the solidarity, the creativity, the ideas, the freedom, those things haven't gone away. Far from being tarnished by all the positives that you gain through that relationship, you can take those forward into something new. You can make something better. Whew. That was hefty. I'm glad I finally got it done. This felt like an important one for a long time and sadly never stopped being relevant. On a slightly lighter note, although only slightly, I guess, given the genre, my EP, XXX, is finally completed and out on September the 1st across platforms. Links are in the description. Please follow me on socials of your choice and wherever you get your music. And if you like what you hear, buying the album on Bandcamp is a great way to support artists because Spotify doesn't. In order to thank my Ko-fi supporters more substantially than usual, I will be, together with the release, putting up some early versions of the songs, images that won't be up anywhere else, and possibly stems. So if you've been considering supporting me for a while, now is a good time to do so. You can also pay the minimum amount, look at the stuff, and then cancel your subscription. It's fine, I won't judge you. But shares, comments, and likes are free, massively helpful, and hugely appreciated. Follow me on Mastodon if you want every weird thought that pops into my brain, Instagram if you want a picture of me maybe once a month, and Twitter if you want to hear as little from me as possible. Huge thanks to Teo for editing this video. Go watch his videos at the letter 15. And as always, thanks to Hazel for helping me film and bringing me cups of tea. And that's it! I won't say I hope you enjoyed this video exactly, but I do really hope that it was useful and you got something of value from it. I'll see you in the next one.